So, welcome everyone to our Study Abroad podcast series. So, today we have Shreyash, who studied at the University of Hong Kong, and we'll be knowing about his journey from Lucknow to Hong Kong. So, welcome Shreyash to our podcast.
Thanks for having me, Vishal. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here and share my experiences. Thank you.
Sure. So, we have some questions for you. So, and then we'll branch out to some discussions from those. So, Shreyash, when was the very first time in your youth that you thought that you should go abroad for some studies or exploration?
So yeah, it all actually started as a very juvenile, I would say very puerile idea. Like in Indian culture, in Indian pop culture, basically, we fancy the idea of studying abroad. We fancy the idea of, having a foreign education degree. So all of it started from there. Honestly, I remember I was in my middle school, I would say, when I kind of started getting this idea from pop culture that there's something as study abroad and that, you go out to study. So it was me and a bit of my mom who were excited about this. But then by the time I reached my high school, things became pretty serious because at my school, we had a very dedicated career cell, which helps you in university shortlisting, in examination preparation, and a lot of things actually. So it's a career counseling cell that I had in my high school. So from there, when I shared this ambition of mine, it kind of became a bit serious. I started getting guidance from my counselors, and every year I used to see a lot of my seniors going abroad. Some going to the US, some going to the UK, some going to other countries like Singapore and stuff. So I also started thinking, and when I was full on into it, that's how it kind of concretized from being an idea. Yeah.
And what were the tests you had to prepare? Any like SAT, TOEFL, IELTS had to go through?
Yeah, so like primarily for US universities, you have to appear for the SAT examination. I think the English language test has kind of become mandatory. So I did appear for IELTS over TOEFL. I did not appear for TOEFL. I appeared for IELTS. But then I think it also depends from university to university because for certain universities and courses, you can get a waiver. Those tests can be waived off, and there are other things you can actually work out. So that depends on where you're applying and what course you're finally looking forward to. But then I did give my SAT and I did give IELTS. So yeah.
Sure, sure. And then once you gave your IELTS, you applied to how many colleges, how many universities?
So I would have applied to a bunch of them in different geographies actually, because like how I approached it, everybody has their own way of doing it, but I approached it in a very hierarchical manner, rather a very pyramid, kind of manner, where I thought my dream colleges would be at the top, and ambitious ones and achievable ones in the middle, and then the backup colleges at the bottom. So I did apply to US universities, I did apply to UK universities, I also applied to universities in Hong Kong and Singapore. And finally, I went with the City University of Hong Kong in Asia. So that's how I kind of applied for it. But then I would have easily applied to around 10, 12 universities, I would say. Bunch of them in the
Sure,
US.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So once you decided, okay, you have to go to this
Mhm.
City University, Hong Kong, and then you have to apply for the visa and then book your flight and accommodation. So which of three were the hardest for you and which was the easiest?
All of them, honestly, because I am from the COVID batch, 2020 cohort. So by the time my university life had to start, things had become really, really nasty, and especially with China's zero, COVID policy, the rules and regulations were very stringent in Hong Kong, especially. So I remember the first time when I went to Hong Kong at the peak of COVID was I had to fly through Dubai because Hong Kong had banned all direct flights from India. So that was a really difficult part. And then, like going through a lot of COVID tests at every airport. And, like you have to had the reports should be not older than these many hours. Some airports accepted 24 hours, others were open with and okay with 48 hours. So all of that was like, and I come from very humble background. So, like we don't have very big connections or, there's nothing like we have done anything like this before. So all of it was pretty overwhelming, but then experience of its own actually. So I think visa and all was pretty smooth because my university did support and sponsor my visa, but then actually going and then settling in while at the same time you had the COVID. I remember I did around 28 days of quarantine alone in Hong Kong, which was very, very difficult, honestly, because you had to go through several tests and a lot of other protocols were there. So yeah, all of that was a little difficult. But then by the time COVID was over, I think things became pretty chilled, and then actual university life started, honestly.
The accommodation was college accommodation only?
No, I was living off campus actually. I did not live on campus. So I directly started living off campus. I do miss sometimes, not being able to live in a hostel, in a, student accommodation kind of a thing, where you have different clubs and activities going on. But then I think directly starting to live in the city, and that to like Hong Kong, in the hustle and bustle of it, had its own merits. So I'm grateful for it. It was initially a little difficult, over other people who were actually in the campus, but then, yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it living even off campus. So
Okay. And how did you find the accommodation, the off-campus accommodation in your case?
universities have these groups. Universities also have these partnerships with several vendors who provide student accommodations. So there are different ways. I don't know how it is maybe in the US, but then in Hong Kong, I think that's a really good part where universities do provide you information and contact details of these off-campus accommodations. So in case if you fail to get a hall, you can easily go for these off-campus accommodations. They are definitely, several times expensive than the college accommodation, the hostel thing, but then definitely worth living like in the city. And I think I don't know how it is in other countries, but then in Hong Kong, they usually kick you out after the second year in most cases. So if you lived in a hall until second year, after that they'll kick you out, so that you also get to learn the city life and all, and so that they can also make space for other new cohort actually. So that's how it is.
This 1 month quarantine in your case, so you had to like stay in a hotel approved
Yeah.
by the Hong Kong authority.
I had to stay in a hotel and I had to bear the cost of it. Like none of it was waived off or something, so it was very, very expensive. But then the most difficult part was, there was a lot of uncertainty around it. So I remember when I landed in, like I had to first go through Dubai. So, like there was a lot of things that your first leg and second leg should fall in Hong Kong. It can't be several connecting flights and stuff. So you have to make sure that it is the shortest duration possible. So I remember flying to Dubai and then taking a 10-hour flight to Hong Kong. And then from there, we were escorted. I mean, the process was pretty smooth. I mean, thanks to Hong Kong's authorities. So after I reached Hong Kong, everything was pretty smooth, like because we were escorted through the government buses to our designated hotels where we stayed. But then, like, the complete isolation that do in a situation of fear was something which was taking a toll on your mental health. Besides that, the functioning and everything was pretty smooth. That's not a problem. But then, yeah, it's just the sentiment part that I'm talking about.
Yeah, so just curious on this isolation part. So when you're isolated, like the food and all came to like your room every
Yeah.
day for this whole month.
Yeah. And during the whole month, I remember I would have done, I don't know how many, several COVID tests, because every second day they used to come and take the test. So, like before I didn't go to Hong Kong, COVID test was a big, I was really, I had the phobia of it. It was really scary. But then now I have done it so many times that my nose has gotten immune to it. So, yeah, I have done so many tests now.
So you are immune to the COVID and the COVID test.
Hopefully, yeah.
Okay. And you would have other batchmates also that were studying in Hong Kong that time
Right.
and would have come from outside. So
Yeah,
all of them had to pretty much go through this, or like
same
some of
process.
them, like some countries having this kind of rule.
So it depends on like what bubble you were coming from. So I remember authorities in Hong Kong had divided uh, the countries into zones. So India, unfortunately, was falling in red zone. So if you had to come through India, you cannot take a direct flight. You had to first fly to a lesser risk country, stay there and do quarantine there for let's say 1 or 2 weeks, and then from there you have to fly to Hong Kong. So it was like this arrangement. But then thankfully, in my case, possibly during that time frame, I didn't have to do a washout in a third country. I could directly fly to Hong Kong via Dubai. But then I have friends from Delhi, from other parts of India who actually had to go through this thing. So they had to go to a third country, do a washout there, and then come to Hong Kong. So yeah, it was pretty nasty, as I said. Yeah,
Once you finished this 1 month quarantine and you shifted to your accommodation, you
right.
were like going to your college every day, or was there like a transition period?
So it was a mix of online classes. So I remember for the first 2 years, it was a lot of online classes and very limited university activities. But then by the end of first 2 years, offline classes were going on in full, like they were full on. So then is when the actual university life started, I would say, because then that would mean that, attendance was compulsory. You had to go to the classes every day. You had to attend the lectures, and alongside that, other activities also started at the university. They were also going on. They were trying to do it in whatever way possible with limited capacity or online. But then once it started offline, everything was pretty normal. So yeah, that was the good part.
Sure. And once you started your classes with all this online and things like that,
Mhm.
so when was your first physical class? Like that was like just after a month of having, or was it like a bit delayed also? Like first few weeks maybe. How was
Uh,
what percentage of offline classes?
So for the first 2 years, like I said, it was a lot of online classes. In fact, like most of the courses were turned entirely online. It also depended on your course. Like if you had to go for labs and stuff and experiment and stuff, you had to take a couple of offline classes, which means you have to be present in Hong Kong. But then if you just had an online class, you can also choose to stay in your home country, like I did for some time. I was in when the second wave of COVID hit, I was back in India. So I did a couple of online classes from here, but then that was also pretty difficult because the time zone was difficult, and trying to manage everything all together was a little challenging, but then fun at the same time. But then like once I shifted to Hong Kong, I think within 1 week I started going to the university. It wasn't like any delay after that. Yeah.
What was your class size like? Like the demographics of the class student? They were from different countries, same
Yeah.
country. What was it like?
Different countries actually, because and it also depended on the course, honestly. Some courses are very stereotypical, so there you would see a lot of mainland Chinese and Hong Kong students, whereas certain courses you would see a lot of exchange students. For example, my minor, international relations, I would have a very good cosmopolitan kind of a classroom where I would have batchmates from Europe, Spain, UK, and other parts of the world, alongside Chinese and Hong Kong students. So it was like that. But then the classes were pretty international. The professors were international, so that was the good part.
So usually, these places you call the professor by name, like not by sir or ma'am. How was that cultural shock for you?
Initially it was, I mean, honestly, it wasn't a big of a cultural shock, I would say. Uh, but then, yeah, I got used to it very soon. But then initially, I was, like accidentally, I would call them professor. So they were humble enough. They would be like, no need to call me professor. You can just call me by my name, whatever it is. So yeah, so very soon I think that is a very good thing, honestly. I mean, depends on how you actually see it, because that reduces the power distance, that reduces the awkwardness between a faculty and a student, especially in university life. So you can be a little bit more open to them. You can discuss a lot of the things. You can disagree oftentimes. So yeah, I think that is a good part, that the bureaucracy and the power distance reduces, which I honestly liked. Yeah.
So your 11th, 12th, what all subjects you did your 11th, 12th in school?
So at my high school, I studied humanities with mathematics. So my subjects were English, geography, mathematics. What else did I study? Uh, yeah, what else did I study? I'm forgetting it actually. Yeah, so I studied English, geography,
Economics
physical education,
also.
economics, psychology, and mathematics. Yeah, those were the subjects.
And then you already made a plan that you get this BBA degree from your undergrad, is it?
Yeah. I always had in mind that I have to study economics. I was a little confused I was dwindling between economics and psychology because I like psychology as well. But then looking at the job landscape, I was like, economics is more fruitful. Economics is more employable, especially in the current geopolitical scenario. So I went with economics. But then I always liked the idea of studying about the world, studying about different polities. So I also chose to study international relations alongside economics.
And this part-time job and like internships, etc., in your last 4 years, I think I see you have done a bit of it
Yeah.
here and there. So could you tell us a bit about that also?
So I started working right from 18 years of age, honestly, and since then I have never stopped working. While I was here in my school, also I did a couple of internships. I started working as a communications coach for an online firm here in India. For 2 years alongside my degree, I did that. After that, in my third year, I started working. I did an internship at an indoor farming company, and then thereafter I did. I'm working as a research assistant since my fourth year for the Department of Public and International Affairs at City University of Hong Kong, where I'm working on an investment migration project, basically alongside my professor. So those are the things that I did, which are pretty much linked to my interests, actually. So I always believed in doing something that I would like doing versus just going for it just for the sake of it for my CV is something that I don't buy. So yeah.
And what was the time commitment that you had in like a week? Like 20 hours is the max you can work?
No, 17 hours is the max in Hong Kong. That's very less, honestly, compared to the Western countries. But then yeah, it is what it is. So I could work. I also worked as a content writer for 1 year. I remember in my third year, honestly. So I used to cover these university events and stuff that was happening, writing about the university. So that was also an interesting experience, actually.
Sure. And how was your job hunting? Like, there's no placement cell usually in
There is.
colleges like this, right? So, did
Yeah,
you miss that?
yeah, there is actually a placement cell. They call it Business Development Center, if I'm not forgetting it. So there you have a dedicated cell, very much like schools of several career counselors. One of the career counselor can be assigned to you. You can take these, advices from them. You can do several meetings, get your CVs reviewed, practice interviews. A lot of things. I think like in that sense, universities are very much supportive. So I did took several sessions with my department with one of my career counselors, which was really helpful, in terms of identifying, because like a third person perspective is very important, where they tell you, okay, this is what I see according to the job market, and objectively they try to help you out. So that was really really helpful for me, and especially in finding the industry that I'm in. I'm in the experts network industry, which I didn't hear about, honestly, 4 years ago. I got to know about that when I shifted to Hong Kong. I spoke with these counselors. So for me, frankly, these career counseling cells have worked throughout, even in my school life and in university life as well.
Yeah. So, they were mostly like helping you like decide the career, giving you information, etc. It's not like they'll invite companies to interview you and
They
all,
do.
right?
Yeah, they do actually. They do that as well. In fact, they have a nomination cell as well, where if they see potential in a candidate, they nominate the students to several companies as well. So in Hong Kong, like we have these career fairs within the universities. So different universities have their own timeline of doing it. So different companies come, their HRs come. You get an opportunity to directly speak with the people who are going to hire you, who are going to interview you. So, and it's like a massive fair that they have of investment banks and all the firms that you can possibly think of are invited to the university, and students are given a free pass to speak with them, introduce themselves, share their CVs. All of that happens, honestly. But then eventually you'll have to go through the typical process of applying to the university and stuff like that. I don't think there is that kind of a placement cycle which happens in Indian universities. I don't think that is something that we have in universities abroad. Yeah.
What about the education of India versus education in Hong Kong? Like, what are the some key differences that you think you observed or you got surprised with?
Okay, that's a nice question, actually, and I'm pretty opinionated in that sense. So, objectively speaking, I think the canvas of opportunities that you get abroad is completely incomparable, because the kind of exposure that you get, and I don't mean it in a belittling or in a demeaning way, honestly, but then it's just a stark observation that the canvas of exposure that you get is way broader than what you would get in an Indian education system, starting from the people that you get to speak to, the networking things that you do, and directly working on researches along with your professor. I'm working on two books actually along with my professor, so that kind of came a bit of as a surprise for me as well, such early on in my career. So that is something, like you do a lot of field trips, uh, and a lot of things are customized and personalized to help you out. That is something that I really like about the Western education system in general. So yeah, so I think it's just the bandwidth of colleagues that you're with. It's the exposure and the experience canvas that you get is something that's very different from our system. Yeah.
So there are a few more things that people usually have to do by their own when they go abroad is like this cooking, cleaning,
Yeah.
washing dishes, laundry,
Yeah.
etc.
Right.
So were you used to it or you were not used to it? How did you adjust to this?
I'm used to it. In fact, now I have become a really good cook. So I would love to host you someday. So, but then, that's the part of it. That's when I said that when I started living directly in the city, these were the things, So I always believe that university life is less about classroom and more about what you learn experientially. So that was something. So before going only, I always liked cooking, honestly. So I started learning these things along with my mother before going as well. But then, like, when you actually do it and it comes across a little bit as a challenge, because you have to manage your studies also. You have to judiciously decide when you can dedicate energy to certain things and when you cannot. But then, yeah, it's just adult life, honestly. I don't have complaints for it. But then, yeah, when going through it, it was a little challenging because you have to quickly shift your focus and stuff. But then I used to do cooking several, because I'm a vegetarian actually, and Hong Kong is a disaster place for vegetarian people. So you are mostly dependent on these tiffin services or veg canteens and stuff. But then I'm someone who cannot eat out a lot. So I'm someone who would like to have plain, simple, home cooked meal. That was also a reason why I made use of my own skills and cooked a lot actually. So yeah.
This one hack that we see that international students use a lot is cook once and eat like three, four times, maybe
I
five,
don't
ten
do
times.
that. No, I don't do that. In fact, I'm very against that. I had friends and neighbors within my building who would do that. But then I don't encourage that, because I think the more you keep the food, the more it decomposes, and ideally it's not safe. But then I have friends who would cook, let's say, butter chicken once, and they would eat it like until 3 days later. Like, you won't do that in India, right? Your mother would whack you if you do that. So, but I never did that. I like eating fresh. I don't like to eat, food that is a day old or something. The same day is fine. Like, you cook and you eat it like twice or thrice. That's okay. But like eating for until 3 days is something that's very bad. No one should do that. I know the reasons, and the compulsions of international students. It's really difficult, honestly. But then try not to do it. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I think everyone will have a threshold. Some people will eat it two times, some three times, some maybe five times, depending on their own preferences.
Right.
Yeah, sure. So, what are your future goals for the next few years? Like, you have any set goals for the next few years?
Yeah, right. So there are a plethora of things, honestly, that excite me. You can call me, jack of one trade and master of none, honestly. I write columns for First Post and CNN News 18. I'm working on research. I'm working in my corporate job as well. So as of now, I don't have a blueprint in front of me, but I'm trying to grab as many things as I can, that interest me, and then eventually see where all of this takes me. But then the idea of being in public life is something that really attracts me. Like being an opinion leader, you can say, being a thought leader is something that I ideally would want to go towards. The idea of, let's say, being in think tanks and stuff is something that really attracts me. I fancy that. So possibly towards that, let's say, alongside social sciences and political science and international relations. I just love international relations, honestly. So yeah.
So, like some higher studies aspiration or more like a
Definitely.
job?
No, no, definitely. I want to do my master's in international relations. During my undergrad, I did get offers from universities like King's, and I was invited for the examination for LSE as well. So ideally, that's where I would like to go. I have a lot of friends in LSE, so I would definitely want to see myself there. But then again, it depends where life takes you. So yeah.
Okay, sure. Okay, so Shreyans, coming to the very last question of our podcast. So, what advice would you give to the younger yourself or the aspirants, who want to go to Hong Kong or City University of Hong Kong or in general study abroad? Any pro tips that you would like to highlight?
Sure. I think the most important tip is sit with yourself and try to understand what would be best fit for you, because I think all of this is marketed very cleverly while you are in your high school or while you are even in your university. So don't fall for the traps. There are a lot of people who would come to you and say, I will standardize everything for you, I would do it for you, and stuff like that. Yes, you might need a lot of guidance during this process. Reach out to your counselors, your teachers, your seniors, and all the people who have actually done it, versus trying to just following your peers, is what I would say. And this is very important when it comes to choosing your course. I think that's the huge mistake we do, because you cannot undo it. You just cannot undo it. Once you have taken a course, yes, there is an option of changing your major later on. I have had friends who, let's say, had taken engineering, but then by their second year they had to change the major, they came to some other degree and stuff, which is very difficult. There is an option of doing that, but then when you actually go through it, it's really, really hard, to manage that. Your study time extends and a lot of things happen. So just so that that doesn't happen, try to understand yourself. What would be my strength, where I see myself, and what is something that I wouldn't get bored of doing. Eventually everything becomes harder. I like economics, but then if you ask me, how was the experience of going through it, it was like really, really difficult, because like economics does get very advanced by the time you reach the end of your degree. So there are a lot of things, so when it comes to choosing your course, do it very diligently, religiously. That's one thing. And second, I always say, the course that you kick your ass off to get an A+ is way less important than the life lessons that you would get experientially. The butt kicks that you would get in real life is something that would be useful for you. So be very perceptive, especially if you're going out of your culture. Please be open-minded. You're going to get a lot of cultural shocks. You're going to get a lot of opinion differences. But this is coming from someone who is very opinionated. I'm very opinionated about a lot of things, but then it was a lesson for me as well, to be more inclusive, to be more accepting, to be more open. And that's very important, to have a broad mind, to have an open mind. That would eventually help you. That's what I would say. And also, don't lose your integrity. I would say, sometimes I have seen this, a lot of young people, they get, let's say, into substance, they get into something else that they might not do it ideally, so because of peer pressure, validation, whatever the hell it is. So I think those are certain things that you need to be mindful of, especially when you actually start your journey versus before. Because before, you have a lot of spoon feeding, you have your parents, your counselors, your teachers, and everybody to help you out. But then when you actually enter that turf, when you're actually in that playground, that's when you are literally on your own. Your parents are not there to see you. There is no hand holding the way we have in Indian education system. Your professors, if you miss your classes, they don't care. If you attend your classes, they don't care. It's like that, actually, very indifferent culture. So in that sense, you have to have the ownership about that. So these are few things that I would say is something that would help everyone in general. Yeah.
Sure, sure, sure. Great tips, and I hope the audience have learned a bit from your experience. And I think you had a roller coaster ride in your undergraduate with all
Indeed.
these experiences. So thank you, Shreyans, for your time, and we'll be uploading this recording on YouTube and also posting on LinkedIn. So there might be some people who might ping you with their
Sure.
questions. So feel free to accept or reject them.
No, no, no. I'm happy to help anyone. Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you, Vishal.
Okay,
Thank you.
then take care. Bye.
Bye.